You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis. I'm CEO and founder of BioHealth Innovation, but also have been the host of BioTalk for the last 8 years, interviewing interesting people around the United States and the world to talk about biohealth topics. Today, we have a first. We have our first person from the Foundation for the National Institute of Health, which is going to be described differently than NIH for a lot of our listeners. Not to confuse it, but I have Dr. Stacey Adam, who is Vice President, Science Partnerships for Translational Science at the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health. Stacey, welcome to BioTalk.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks for having me.
First thing we're going to let everybody do is hear you introduce yourself, because you know yourself better than I do. So you're going to tell our listeners a little bit about you and how you got to where you are today.
I am a Vice President in Science Partnerships, Translational Science here at the Foundation. What that means is that I help to oversee a number of research portfolios at the Foundation. I've been with the Foundation 9.5 years. Before that, I was in corporate consulting. I worked in Deloitte's federal healthcare practice for science and strategy. Before that, I was a bench scientist. So I did my graduate work at Duke, my PhDs in pharmacology, toxicology, and I then went on to do my postdoc at Stanford. And from there, proceeded into the corporate world. The Foundation, what I do, the role and mission there is that we are a 501c3 recognized in the state of Maryland. So to your point, while we have those three little letters, NIH, in our name, we are a standalone organization. We operate 98% of the time the way most 501c3s or nonprofits do, but we have a unique twist. We have congressional legislation that actually brought us into existence, and we are congressionally authorized to work alongside NIH in unique ways that others cannot. And our whole mission is to serve the mission of the NIH through helping them conduct public-private partnerships that they can't do through normal federal mechanisms.
Thank you for that and the clarification. We're going to dive a little bit more into what some of these public-private partnerships look like, but I'm not going to hold it against you that you're a Dookie. I'm a University of Kansas basketball fan, and Duke is our arch rival, Stacey.
I was going to say, Rich, you probably are going to hate me for numerous reasons. My undergraduate degree is from Nebraska, so I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I joke to people that I went to all the schools that people love to hate. So there you go.
Well, that's okay. Nebraska's not as bad. We don't play in football and we don't play in basketball anymore. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about some of the primary public-private partnerships that you're engaged with FNIH. And then we're going to go into a little bit about some interesting topics that are very important to everybody around the world these days. So one of them is you have a Validation and Qualification Network, VQN. Let's talk a little bit about what it is, how it got started, who your partners are, and what you're doing to advance it.
The Validation Qualification Network, or the VQN, is a new partnership that we have started up to help us develop, standardize, and implement new approach methodologies. So NAMs. This topic has been in the press of late. It happens to be a key topic that both the NIH and the FDA have highlighted as a priority for this current administration. We are working alongside both agencies to help move this forward. The VQN is going to be part of a larger whole called the Complementary Consortia. Complementary meaning complement animal and research experimentation. We are one of three pillars for that particular effort. And we are the public-private partnership side of the effort. So we are meant to be bringing in, alongside the federal partners that I mentioned, as well as others, the private sector organizations. And so you asked which partners that we have that have joined. We have just a little over 30 private sector partners spanning a wide variety of sectors. So we have everybody from large pharma to small methods developers, nonprofits who have a particular interest in this area, both from the animal reduction side, so as well as those for bettering human health. So we have a pretty wide range of nonprofits as well. And then we also have other industries that we have not typically worked with at the foundation as much, We have the American Chemistry Council representing chemical companies. We're seeking other partners in the spaces of ag chem and other food safety and areas of that realm as well. So we are casting a very large tent for this particular partnership. And no wonder why. The new approach methodology space touches a great number of areas. And so this will be a unique partnership for us in that we think we will have even more than the 30-some partners that we already have at the table.
Utilizing animals in testing for new drugs, therapeutics, biologics, and other things has been around for ever since the beginning. And it's somewhat critical to utilize animals before you actually go to humans. So talk a little bit about how it evolved with animals. Right now, what are some of the alternatives that people are looking at to try to eliminate the utilization of animals in this testing as they're trying to go through the different clinical stages to look at the efficacy of a drug?
To your point, animal modeling goes back into history. I think what people also don't realize is that these new approach methodologies, while the name would suggest that they are new to the scene or they haven't been around a while, there's actually probably a couple decades worth of work that has built and has begun to culminate. And I think we're really just sort of hitting that kind of the upswing or the peak of where technology and technology development is around these methodologies to be able to bring them to the forefront and really make the strong push for them to begin replacing animals. And so the importance of animal testing or any preclinical testing before drugs go into humans, not much of a mystery as far as why we would want to do that. We have new compounds constantly being developed. We do our best to, at least on a structural basis, as these get designed, to understand that they should target what we think they are targeting. They should be beneficial with relatively low side effects or harm. But we actually don't know that until we begin actually putting them into biological systems. And so animals have historically quintessentially been the way to do that. Oftentimes, I think if you go back to history and you look at the FDA regulation for any new drug or a cosmetic or anything else that has to be tested in 2 species other than humans before it proceeds into, human testing or human use. And oftentimes that's a rodent species, so rats or mice, and then a non-rodent species. And people have just been wanting to move away from that for a number of reasons. One, the ethics of it all. I want to acknowledge that. I know there's debate on both sides as to the ethics of it, but from a perspective of drug developers and, even toxicologists, there are other reasons to do this. Animal models can be quite lengthy, quite expensive. For some human biological systems, they actually don't replicate well. They don't actually produce results that eventually tell us, that this will work in humans or, won't be toxic. So replacing these, we save time, we save money, and hopefully we actually replicate the human biologic process better. So that's the idea of, while animals have been the gold standard because they were one of the easiest things to move into, it made sense to use another living entity to test things, because there are processes that happen biologically in a live individual or live animal that don't happen, in vitro testing, meaning cells in a dish or things like that. But the beautiful part about it is the technology has gotten such that we can actually begin to replicate those processes from in live animal, live human, in these kind of more in vitro, in laboratory based systems. And so I think that's why, as I said, the technology has just gotten such that we can begin to do this. And I think it has all the benefits that you would want, both for those studying toxicology and those developing drugs, to be able to kind of do this. And we hope that we are successful in taking what are maybe fairly well developed, maybe a little nascent technologies, and actually the VQN will help push these down the regulatory development pathway so that our regulatory bodies feel more comfortable about replacing animal models with these tests. That is the whole goal of the VQN, is to provide the evidence for being able to replace animals with these new methodologies.
And I think one of the things that would be important is, and why you have private-public partnership on this, is that everybody gets to share in the results and the data that comes out of this testing. So, which is unusual because you have competitors who are all part of the partnership now who are working together with FNIH to come up with some alternatives that can be shared throughout the industry, which is not normally done. So talk a little bit about how these people are working together for looking for a common outcome that would benefit everybody.
And that's a hallmark, just for the audience's reference, for many of the projects that FNIH does. We work in this public-private partnership collaborative space, but we do it in as many partnerships as we can in the pre-competitive model that you've just explained, where companies, organizations that may or may not always work together, they may actually be competitors in the space. We provide them a space where they can share information openly between themselves. We work to find the common benefit, the old adage that a rising tide lifts all boats. That's the target. We do that we are the neutral third-party broker. We can negotiate contracts with all these different entities that allow for that open space, allow them all to protect their own IP, to protect what they need, and then still function to perform projects that will give us results that better the whole field. The companies, get to use these results. They are beneficial to them, but they are not exclusively beneficial to them. Their competitors, other companies can also use these results. And so we bring the field up without having it be exclusively favored to one company, one academic institution, that sort of thing. And the reason that companies will do this is we target areas or partnerships that require more than one company, more than one entity to work together. These are not partnerships that a single R01 grant could be given by the NIH to do. These aren't things that simple bilateral agreements between a company and the government or two companies could do. They're niche areas that you need everybody working together to cost share, to risk share, to really lay down standards for the whole field, to make this easier and more streamlined. So not only the companies participating, but everybody who comes behind has the benefit of using this. And the companies see this because this isn't anything that they could pay for to do on their own, or that even they themselves could just, even if they had all the money in the world, decide to invest in it. They can't do it by themselves. And so that's where we come in. And so that's really the appeal for them to come do this, even though it may seem, at least at the surface, that it puts them at a slight disadvantage because they are talking to their competitors and doing this sort of thing.
And one of the other things I think that would be interesting to discuss would be, you talk about technologies. There's new technologies being involved here. I'd like to have you just give an example of maybe some of the new technology that's being utilized. But if new technology emerges out of this private-public partnership research that's being done, and it actually has intellectual property, who owns the intellectual property that comes out of the private-public partnership work? And, how does that work when you have 30 different partners involved?
Well, I'll kind of take that in stages. So first, let's talk a little bit about the 30 partners. So the Validation Qualification Network will essentially be an overarching umbrella infrastructure for this type of work, but we intend to have very discrete projects that will come in below it that will focus on very specific domains of applicability or context of use, whatever term you'd like to use. And what that means is they'll tackle just very specific kind of areas of progress. And by doing that, we're able to take those 30, 40, 50, however many partners we eventually have, and even people who aren't necessarily part of, the governing body of the partnership, to come together in these smaller groups, focus on very specific topics. So one, that limits a little bit how much we have to control the IP because we're going to be having a little bit more focus. Two, that focus allows us to get better alignment. And so to give you an example of what this might look like, and I'll just take the in vitro side of NAMs because I think it's a little easier to explain. NAMs obviously can be in vitro, in silico, and chemico. We kind of have a wide range. The in vitro side, let's talk about microphysiologic systems or organs on a chip, which, again, pretty popular these days. Everybody sort of recognizes. Let's think about this in terms of there are 5 companies that have heart on a chip. And I'm making all this up, by the way. So,
right. We're not going to get into specifics to disclose the specific thing that you're working on.
Correct.
I understand.
5 companies who have heart on a chip. All of their technology is a little different. It all has the same general idea of what they're trying to do. They're trying to replicate cardiac function in this kind of microphysiologic system that they've put on a silicone chip. But maybe they started with a different starting cell within the heart. Maybe they have a slightly different proprietary media formulation. Maybe the technology that they've decided to use is a little different. We, as the partnership, that's not what we care about. Honestly, we will have, in place the idea that any IP that they come in with is their IP to retain. We won't have any sort of trying to reach through that sort of thing. What we care about is that those 5 systems can produce similar enough readouts that we can all agree on are the right readouts that both the end users, so pharma companies, chemical companies, whoever it is, agree that this serves their needs, because if they need to know that their drug has cardiac effects, they can do that. And also the regulators agree that these standardized readouts that we're talking about doing are ones that they agree are the right ones to talk about drug efficacy, talk about, toxicity. And so it is the standardization of these readouts. It is the reporting and the streamlining of that the project will focus on, not necessarily the technology itself. And we do that if we do our jobs well enough, we can put in parameters for this that allow not only these 5 technologies, but any technologies similar enough down the road can benchmark against these technologies. So people can continue to move at the pace of innovation, but still have enough standardization and harmonization that when they go to put these preclinical results to a regulatory body, such as the Food and Drug Administration in the US or the Environmental Protection Agency, they will be able to say, yes, we've seen what this looks like. We know that you're benchmarking against things that we've sat at the table and we've had conversations and looked at. We are comfortable with this. Let's move forward. Because honestly, that's the biggest issue right now with the new approach methodologies, where animals we've had for years, an animal physiologic system is fairly standard unless you're manipulating genetically. These new approach methodologies can be very widely varying depending on how people go about approaching them. And so the standardization and streamlining, especially of the readouts and the reporting and what goes to regulators, is really been a pain point that everybody has been trying to tackle. And so we hope that that'll be one of the main focuses. So again, that's a little bit of a long answer, but hopefully it articulates that there are areas of pre-competitiveness that don't necessarily have to deal with taking on the IP of the companies and the technologies themselves.
I'm very familiar with the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, which does this in other industries.
Who is at the table with us.
And also, okay, they're one of your partners. So
they are.
And then, I don't know, is US Pharmacopoeia involved with you at all? USP?
They are not yet.
Okay.
Doesn't mean that they won't be in the future.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, as far as the federal partners, in addition to NIH, FDA, NIST, we have about 13 other federal partners that range from NASA to the Consumer Protection Bureau. We've got a lot of folks sitting at the table.
Which is very encouraging to see that different federal agencies are willing to work together, which is nice. Sometimes novel, but it's very good to see that. And not only, the FDA in the United States is the gold standard globally, and this has global implications. So while this work, I would imagine, mostly is going on in the US, and you can correct me if I'm wrong there, what is the implications with dealing with Europe, Asia, and other parts of the world who are also going to be interested in these standards?
We are working to engage internationally. We, of course, are starting with a US-centric focus because this is a public-private partnership between the US government and the private sector. But we know we're not the first organization to tackle the issue of new approach methodologies. We know we're not the only ones working in this direction. The US isn't even the only one working in this direction. So we have reached out, and we have members of various international organizations who are sitting on our Validation Qualification Network Steering Committee, which is our governing body for the VQN, as advisory members. So they have chosen not to kind of vote the way our US government or our private sector colleagues do, but they want to be there because they have ongoing efforts themselves. They want to keep abreast of what we're doing. And this includes the European Commission. This includes PDMA and the NIHS from Japan, which are their regulatory bodies. We are working to bring EMA representatives to the table. They've got a little bit of a review process, but we are assured that we're probably having them come and join us. We have outreach to Korea, Australia, India. We think the Australians will be relatively quick in coming to join us. Things will be a little bit more complex with our Korean and Indian colleagues. There's a little bit more government kind of conversations that have to happen. But we are excited to cast this wide net because this is a global trend. And we think that we just need to have everyone at the table, if nothing else, sharing information and listening to each other.
While it's a win to get everybody to work together, what do you look at as the major goals or milestones, or what's going to be the major win that would come out of this for everybody?
I think the major win that we hope is that at least what we're targeting for our first couple of years is 4 to 8 pilot projects, as I articulated, that will have specific domains of applicability or context of use that will not only act to move new approach methodologies in those spaces forward. And we hope that we can get at least 4 of the 8 fully into evidentiary acceptance by regulators. The others will probably push down the pathway, further validation, get them closer to the evidentiary acceptance, even if we can't get them fully over the finish line. So there will be tangible effects to that in very specific new approach methodologies. But as I articulated, one of the issues is that there's just a lack of standardization, a lack of standard common data elements collected, reporting to regulators. We hope to be able to document in an open collaborative process. These are what we're reading out. These are how we're reporting it. These are how we're doing. And we will basically share all of that information with the public. So these can come along, maybe as with other partnerships that the FNIH has done, we hope our regulatory colleagues will find these helpful and that they will get incorporated into regulatory guidance. We have another umbrella partnership that's been operating for 20 years called the Biomarker Consortium, where we've worked with FDA for getting biomarkers down the qualification pathway. We've helped them generate kind of the content that has gone into at least 10 guidance documents that the FDA has eventually put together. So I would love to see that for the VQN as well. How do we help shape regulatory guidances, policy, that sort of thing? We have policy shaping organizations sitting at the table on the steering committee as well. And I know they have a desire to have this information affect more globally, to be able to be used by not only the US government, Congress, that sort of thing, but internationally. So I'm hoping this will have wide-reaching effects.
We're talking with Dr. Stacey Adam, Vice President, Science Partnerships, Translational Science, the Foundation for the National Institute of Health, on a very important topic right now. And you mentioned governance, and basically FNIH is an independent body outside of NIH, but you have HHS, NIH, FDA, and all of these other bodies which you interact with. Talk a little bit about sort of the governance of FNIH, and as you're going through this private-public partnership on the VQN, Validation and Qualification Network, talk about the different governances that exist between your primary organizations in the federal government and this partnership with FNIH.
As far as the foundation itself, obviously it is structured as an organization very much the way most nonprofits are structured. We have a C-suite, we have everybody. Within our organization, science partnerships is one of the larger kind of aspects of this. We've got about 35 people, and all we do is manage these types of big multi-sector partnerships. So if you think about my teams within science partnerships, we are the facilitators. We are the neutral third-party brokers. If you need a visual picture, we are the central hub to the many spokes. And as part of that, we have, in addition to ourselves who do the day-to-day project management and the negotiation with a lot of the partners, we have fundraising colleagues that help us work the business development side of things. We have legal colleagues who are brilliant, because if you are going to be that central hub to all of these spokes, there's a lot of legal negotiation and contracting that happens too. And so we have all of those resources at our disposal. And we have the flexibility, as I said, of operating in the nonprofit space versus the federal space that allows us a little bit of flexibility as to how we act as that hub. As far as how then that translates into our individual partnerships, so we negotiate with these partners. We have in place either confidentiality agreements, memorandums of understanding, whatever is the appropriate mechanism to make sure everybody's comfortable sitting at the table. Sometimes it's financial agreements. And we then create governance bodies for each of the partnerships. In the case of this VQN, we are still in the early stages, so we have a single governance body just for simplicity. I imagine this might get a little bit more complex over time as we go along. But the steering committee is the voting body, is the decision-making partner within the VQN. And it is made up of, as I said, probably about 18 public sector partners and over 30 private sector partners. Public sector carries 50% of the vote. Private sector partner carries 50% of the vote. Every organization gets a single vote for their organization. They tell us up front who will be putting in that vote for them. And then if we have a tie between the two sides, which very rarely ever happens if we do our job appropriately because we build to consensus, we have two steering committee chairs, one from the private sector, one from the public sector, that then help the FNIH adjudicate an answer. So it's kind of, a little bit like parliamentary rules and that sort of thing. Everything that we do within the partnership until the partnership decides is kept confidential. We operate under, good rules of order about just not sharing anything outside what gets said. We want this to be a safe space for discussions, that sort of thing. From the steering committee, those pilot projects that we were talking about, each of those will have its own little governing partnership and team that FNIH will help facilitate just to get resources and things there, but the team itself will have votes and kind of understandings there and will have partnership agreements. It's pretty basic. We don't try and get too complex. We just have enough complexity that people can have a voice, have their representation there, but that we can move as nimbly as we possibly can because we have to move at the pace of relevance.
You're right. That's two good terms there, nimbly and relevance. And again, it's nice to hear those terms associated with the Foundation for NIH. Thank you for that explanation, because it's a process that's been working for many decades and it continues to work now. So why change it if it isn't broken, right?
Correct.
The last time I visited FNIH, I think you were getting into new offices over there in North Bethesda. Are you still over in North Bethesda now?
We are. We're still in the offices. I guess they're not so new anymore.
They're not new now.
But they're lovely. You should come visit us.
Yeah, they're beautiful offices. The thing that's important for us is, we really promote the BioHealth Capital Region, as we refer to it, as Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. And you're sort of in the epicenter of it when you look at the Bethesda, Rockville, Gaithersburg area. Is there a benefit for you guys being located right there in North Bethesda to have a lot of the partners around you?
Oh, I think it's a huge benefit. I mean, one, because of one of our largest partnerships is the NIH. We're just about 2 miles north of the main campus. We get really good interaction with our NIH colleagues this way. So I think that's very functional. The other federal colleagues, that's obviously something by being here, but people underestimate the sheer amount of representation that many of the private sector companies also put in this area. Many of the nonprofits we work with are either based out of DC or have at least some representation here. Most of the pharma companies have a regulatory or legislative branch that is located here. So it's actually very beneficial to us because we really get a chance to kind of talk to many of our colleagues, have face-to-face interactions, at least when we're not all under global pandemic or things like that. And, to your point, we rely a lot on our partners too for even small things, like really good partnership with places like AstraZeneca and things where we sometimes use their meeting space up in Gaithersburg. It's just a really good flow, and it just really allows for a really good flow of information by having so much kind of centralized here in the district, Maryland and Virginia area.
So if someone doesn't have a presence in this region and with all of these assets here, they should certainly consider it, right, Stacey?
Absolutely.
You can be part of our promotional campaign to help promote the BioHealth Capital Region. We've gone through a lot of stuff in a short period of time here, and I know there's a lot for our listeners to really try to absorb, but is there anything that you'd like to discuss that we have that I haven't asked you or that you feel is important for the listeners to hear?
One, for the VQN specifically, be on the lookout this Friday, August 1st. And I don't know when this podcast will necessarily come out. So if it is past August 1st, there will be a website up. We are doing a call. We are doing a request for information for submission of concepts to come in for these pre-competitive projects that we will review and try and put project teams together from. So we'd really like to hear from the community. And that is the entirety of the biohealth community. So please take a look at that. Also, there will be other opportunities with the VQN. There will be public workshops and things coming down. throughout this year and into next. And then as we move into kind of full implementation of the pilot projects, we will be looking for partners for those projects. So just keep an eye out on the website, FNIH.org. We've got things coming down. And then in general, the FNIH prides itself on the idea that our ideas for partnerships can come from anywhere. So we have a wide remit, as you might guess, to the fact that there are 27 institutes within the National Institutes of Health. Really, in the spectrum of health and disease, we cover a wide area. If you have thoughts, if you think you have a good idea for a partnership, we're always happy to have a conversation. So please don't hesitate to reach out, find out more, come talk to us.
So basically, if they want to learn about the VQN, that doesn't have its own website. They go to the FNIH website, correct?
So it does have a subpage within the FNIH website. I apologize. I can send you what that actually is, but there is a Validation Qualification Network subpage on the FNIH page. But if you go to FNIH.org, search NAM in the search tab, it will take you directly to the VQN page.
Well, super. Thank you. And I want to thank Dr. Stacey Adam for being on BioTalk. She's the Vice President for Science Partnerships and Translational Science at the Foundation for National Institutes of Health. So I think we've educated the listeners on what FNIH is, as well as some of the programs and private-public partnerships you're engaged in, and especially this very important one, which is the Validation and Qualification Network. So, Stacey, thank you very much for being on BioTalk today.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.